I'm Linda Poznanter. I work for Fallbrook Union High School District at our independent study school, Oasis. And I come to the table with 39 years of experience teaching high school and junior high, and then I'm also a Marine brat, so I've had the dependence experience.
Tell me a little bit about independent school and how it's different.
Independent study is a different modality of learning. The student chooses to go at his or her own pace and do the work independently at home, meet with us for an hour a week, and then be assigned 30 hours of homework in 2 to 4 subjects. So it's the kid who is a little more independent, a little more self-motivated, the student maybe who doesn't like the drama of a larger campus, or maybe the person's been harassed, or maybe it's a young mom. There's, the students who want to do it differently.
Yeah. What are your personal experiences with military dependent students?
Well, off and on, I think for a good chunk of the 39 years, I have had military dependents in my classes, especially teaching next to Camp Pendleton. So it's been an automatic that I would have students, and then in the last few years, being an independent study, it's not just that I've had the children of military men and women, but I also have very young wives who perhaps are 17 and 18 and they're married to a young Marine, and suddenly the Marine is deployed and the young wife is left in Fallbrook and probably doesn't know too many people and is trying to finish school.
Yeah. How has the organization you're affiliated with kind of helped or made strides in improving the relationship and lifestyle or life of a military dependent?
I think for as many years as I've been back in the district, I actually graduated there many years ago, but having come back to the district in the 80s, there's been a military liaison officer who worked in tandem with the high school and tried to make district teachers and other personnel aware of the kinds of problems that military kids have had. And I think the first time I became more aware of it was probably during the Persian Gulf War. Being reminded in faculty meetings to be sensitive to the needs of kids who are under a great deal of stress, who are experiencing tension or grief or some kind of issue because mom or dad was in a fighting operation.
Already ahead of the game with that.
Yes, I mistakenly thought today that I wouldn't be hearing anything new. As a matter of fact, I did a pre-write. I used to teach just English, and I wrote about a half a page of issues that I thought would be discussed today, and I thought I would know it all, and I didn't know it all at all. We haven't discussed any of the kinds of things that I thought would be the issues, like always being the new kid in a new school, or having an intense desire to have some roots. Those aren't the things that are being discussed today. Maybe tomorrow, but not today.
What do you, since we're on the topic, what do you think you or anybody else taking this workshop can get out of this or will get out of this?
I think some really specific strategies that we can use in terms of recognizing the anxieties that military dependents experience and being able to recognize that perhaps if they're in a grieving situation, their behaviors might be very, very different individually, one from another, and that the kinds of things that we need to do to help them bridge what used to be the constant in their lives into what now is this new normal.
Yeah. What are some of the advantages or challenges that you've encountered with dealing with military dependents?
Well, one of the things that I tied from my own past to what the kids are experiencing is often they have a higher level of maturity than the local kids who maybe have never been beyond the border of California. These are students who have spent a few years on the East Coast, been back to the West Coast, maybe spent a year in Germany, maybe a year in Okinawa or someplace. And so their idea of the world is a whole lot larger than the ones who have been to the Del Mar Fair and maybe up to San Francisco. So usually they've seen a lot more and they've had to accept a lot more responsibility than the other kids. And sometimes you can say, oh, poor kids, they had to shoulder more responsibility. And then other times you can think, no, this is someone who is well on his or her way to adulthood. And part of the reason of that is these experiences and the necessity the kid has had to have to grow up quicker and maybe shoulder some of the responsibility for that parent who's out of the area.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess kind of when you're thrown into a new situation, you either gotta, you know, handle it and make it work, or you guess kind of break down and not.
Yes, I think any student who switches from one school to another, even if it's just from inland North County to Carlsbad or Oceanside, there is some amount of anxiety of being this new person who doesn't have a group yet, who doesn't have any friends yet, who doesn't know how demanding this particular school is. And there is no choice. One simply has to walk in that door and be that new person. And so one grows whether one likes it or not.
Do you think there is something that can be done to kind of help make that gap between, you know, being a new student and finding that group that schools can do?
I do, and in the way you asked the question, I just flashed on an idea of perhaps counselors setting up something where there would be a support group for military dependents who have just moved to the area. And the support group could be other military dependents, but as well could be students, perhaps the ones who join organizations like the Kiwanis or the Ag Kids who have a specialty, a little something to kind of welcome and help the transition to the new school. And I think having the teachers really aware of what the military dependent experience is would be a huge change. I don't think that's something that's really there yet, where the teacher is aware of the fact that maybe the grading scale in Texas was different, or that the approach in Virginia might not be the same as the approach in California, and so forth.
Yeah, finding a common ground with that.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with any initiatives or special programs targeted for military?
No, this is the first one that I was made aware of, and I was really surprised coming in to see how large the program was, how many people were involved in it, that it wasn't just a tiny group discussion. I had no idea that the scope was this large, and the people were so dedicated to their ideals of making the experience for military dependents productive and less painful as the situation requires.
Yeah. How do you think public education has responded to helping or adapting with the military dependents?
Looking back over the years, I don't think it responded much at all in the 50s or 60s or possibly even the 70s. But since probably the early 1990s, I think educators have become far more aware of the special needs of their military dependents. I think in the olden days, we were simply the new kids in the new class, and hopefully the teacher recognized that we were in an entirely new situation, but I doubt it. I think we're much more able to cope with the surprise of the new student and what his or her experience might have been up to that point. And I think the more of us who have had that experience, the easier it'll be for the kids to make the transition. And then for the people, I don't expect us to hire solely military brats as teachers, but we can share this. We can go back to our schools and share this information and make others more aware of it. And I think with the continuing education, the books, we've got a bag with I think there are 4 books in the bag, and all of them look like good reading in terms of understanding that experience and how to be the transition from the old way to the new way. So I think we're making progress.
Yeah. And I guess my last question, which will be interesting for you to answer as a military brat, what, if any, are the differences between base schools and schools off base, public schools, I guess?
I think my most sharp contrast was probably starting first grade. I didn't get to go to kindergarten because it was private and 30 miles away and we only had 1 car. So I began first grade in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and it was a base school, and I just accepted that it was a base school. And it was many years later when my mother explained to me that the Marine Corps had built that school specially to circumvent the system of segregation in North Carolina and the rest of the South. This was 1954, 1955, when there were segregated schools which were separate but certainly not equal. And so the Marine Corps, in order to keep their enlisted men's children from having to attend substandard schools, actually built a campus on base, and all of us kids of different ethnicities went to school together, thought that was the norm, didn't know it was any different, didn't really understand that schools were segregated until we read about it years later in history books. So things have changed, and you know, I'm seeing maybe the beginning of a new era where there's much more understanding on the part of educators of what the kids have experienced.
Yeah, and even you know, the fact that there's even programs like this going on there.
Exactly. I can't remember anyone ever really understanding that I'd been a continent away the year before, or that well, the year before 7th grade, that there were cobras that slithered into the kitchen, or open sewage, or any of the unusual things that I'd experienced in all of the shots for cholera and malaria and diphtheria and all the exotic diseases, and that I hadn't had a telephone, TV, radio experience, and that we lived in a house that had concrete 6-foot walls with broken glass at the top and booby traps on the doors. And then suddenly I'm back in the United States and things are safe and normal, except for, of course, are the Soviets going to push the button?
Well, good. It sounds like, you know, I'm always, I guess, surprised, not surprised, but encouraged by military grads.
We're supposed to be resilient.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. I think we are. I think we're much more perhaps compassionate for kids who do have to uproot for whatever reason. We're more compassionate about the idea of the kid going through some kind of huge change and wanting to be there as a resource in case the kid realizes, I could use another adult on my team.
Yeah, and one of the other interviews, the lady said, keeping the school as a constant. So even though the kid's moving around, the school is still the school and kind of has the same idea. So, and I thought that was a really good way to put it, you know, that the school should be the constant.
Yes, and sometimes that's the only constant. A generation back from mine, my mother was an Army brat. And there was such a difference, I think. In the South there were 3 grades and then graduation, and on the West Coast it was 4 grades and graduation. And I think it was all that moving that kept her from getting to the finish line. And one of the things she had as a focus for my sister and me was that we were getting to the finish line and we were going on to higher education. So no matter where we lived, the focus was, you're going to graduate, you're going to go on to higher education, you're going to be able to take care of yourself. And she didn't say don't date a serviceman, but I decided, no, as nice as they are and handsome as they are in uniform, I do not want to move any place once I get settled.